August 1969. An ex-convict, Charles Manson, and his makeshift family of dropouts kills 7 innocent people in a 2-night binge of terror. Charles Manson epitomizes the menace of serial killers, people who murder again and again, not for profit or revenge, but for the thrill of power and domination. The Charles Manson family and America's serial killer epidemic on this edition of the 20th century. I'm Mike Wallace. It was a shocking crime. 7 murders, cloaked in the language of revolution. And it set the entire country on edge. Author Joan Didion wrote, "For many people in Los Angeles, the 1960s ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969, at the exact moment when word of the murders on Cielo Drive traveled like brush fire through the community."
We have a weird homicide.
In a scene described by one investigator as reminiscent of a weird religious rite, 5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate and her husband, screen director Roman Polanski. Miss Tate, who starred in Valley of the Dolls, was 8 months pregnant and was found in a bikini-type nightgown with a rope around her neck attached to the body of a man.
2 bodies inside, 2 bodies outside.
Among the other victims were Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring and coffee heiress Abigail Folger. Authorities would allow no one in an unofficial capacity inside the posh $200,000 home in the hills overlooking Los Angeles. When police arrived, they found the telephones and electricity lines cut. The bodies had been dead about 12 hours. They were discovered this morning by a maid who ran screaming to neighbors. One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
Sharon Tate's husband, director Roman Polanski, returned hastily from London, where he had been working on a film. He denied rumors that drugs were behind the killings.
Sharon not only didn't use drugs, she didn't touch alcohol, she didn't
At a
smoke
press conference,
cigarettes.
Polanski painted a macabre picture of the scene inside his house.
The house is open now. You will see the baby clothes. You will see the room which he was painting. You will see a lot of blood.
While the police admitted they had no suspects in the Bel Air massacre, there were 2 more murders 15 miles away in the Silver Lake section of Los Angeles. Market owner Leo LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were found by their children stabbed and mutilated.
Police at first did not see the parallels between the Tate and LaBianca murders.
The word war was carved into LaBianca's chest, and "Death to Pigs" was smeared in the blood of one of the victims. The word pig had been scrawled in blood on the door of the Bel Air mansion, where actress Sharon Tate and 4 others were slain, but police said, despite the similarities, they do not believe the crimes are linked.
Those messages proved to be crucial in tying the crimes together. Meanwhile, Los Angeles lived in fear, and the world looked on in morbid fascination. It took investigators 3 months to locate who was behind the killings. It was Charles Manson, a drifter, whose career in crime came out of a background of poverty and deprivation.
I come from the hills of Kentucky. I come from hard times, bologna for Sunday dinner. I come from the Depression.
Manson was born in Cincinnati in 1934, an illegitimate child.
Fathers, all men.
After dropping out of 7th grade, he was never not in trouble, from burglary to check forgery.
When I was a child, I used to be crying and bitching, and the old man said, "You do the crime, boy?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And he'd say, "Well, shut up and do your time."
Right.
And I'd say, "Shut up and do your time." Even though I didn't think it was right, I had to do 10 years for a $37 check.
Other arrests followed: armed robbery, pimping, auto theft. By 1967, when he was released from McNeil Island Penitentiary in Washington State, Manson had spent more than half his life in reform schools and prisons. In prison, Manson learned to play the guitar. After he got out, he headed for California, hoping to become a recording star. His first stops were Berkeley and Haight-Ashbury, hotspots in America's emerging hippie drug culture.
When I get back out, and your kids pick me up out of the street and pick me up out of the garbage can, All I want's the little girls. I love them little girls. I'm following them little girls around. I ain't got no thought in my mind about nothing. I'm not trying to stop nobody. I'm playing music. I'm free.
Manson enticed librarian Mary Brunner to join him, then go-go dancer Susan Atkins. The Manson family was born. Police cracked down on the hippies in Haight-Ashbury. To avoid arrest, Manson and his followers took off for Los Angeles. He met Dennis Wilson of the rock group The Beach Boys after Wilson picked up 2 of his girls hitchhiking. The family then moved in with Wilson for 3 months, finally stealing his clothes and wrecking his Mercedes. In August of 1968, Manson and 25 hardcore members of his family moved to Spahn Ranch, a dilapidated movie set where westerns like High Noon and The Cisco Kid had been filmed years before.
I never really lived at the ranch. The ranch was a mailing address.
Manson later denied the ranch was his residence.
I lived in a sleeping bag on a motorcycle with a guitar.
Life on the ranch was devoted to pleasure and violence, and it was all orchestrated by Charlie. He dispensed the LSD and marijuana. He organized the sessions of group sex. Former Manson follower Paul Watkins lived there at the time.
All we ever did was just have fun. That's all we ever did. I mean, we just played around the ranch and had fun, and that appealed to me.
It was from Spahn Ranch that Manson launched his predatory attacks on that other world at the Tate and LaBianca homes. Only a week after the murders, Charles Manson was in custody for auto theft, but the police did not connect him with the murders. They had him, and they let him go. Released on a technicality, Manson soon returned to Spahn Ranch. While the murders remained unsolved, Los Angeles stayed on nervous alert. A break in the case was finally announced on December 1st.
The development of information from the 2 separate investigations of the Tate and LaBianca cases led detectives to the conclusion that the crimes in both cases were committed by the same group of people.
The most compelling evidence for the murder indictments came from Manson devotee Susan Atkins, in jail on prostitution charges. Atkins bragged to a cellmate, Ronnie Howard, about taking part in both the Tate and LaBianca killings on Charlie's command. Howard contacted the warden and police with the information. By now, Manson was back in jail on auto theft and arson charges. This time, the police had him. Charged with the 7 Tate LaBianca murders were Susan Atkins, Charles Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Leslie Van Houten was indicted for the 2 LaBianca killings. And behind it all was the instigator, the manipulator, Charles Manson.
What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here.
The Manson family's arraignment for the 7 murders would lead to one of the longest, most expensive, most chaotic criminal trials in American history. The trial of Charles Manson and the 3 female defendants began in June of 1970 and lasted for 9.5 chaotic months. A circus atmosphere surrounded the judicial proceedings, beginning with Manson hiring and firing not only his own attorneys, but also those of his co-defendants. The case of a pregnant Hollywood starlet murdered by drug-crazed hippies attracted journalists from around the world. And with all the publicity, the defendants soon eclipsed their victims as celebrities. In downtown Los Angeles, Manson family members used the courthouse as their stage, playing to the press and curiosity seekers.
How can you say that there's no question of his innocence unless you were with him at the time and it was somewhere else?
Well, the newspapers now are dropping the word alleged. I can say anything I want to say.
Music and lyrics by Charles Manson.
Who wrote that? So bring only your perfection, jail, for their love will only be. No cold pain, fear, or hunger. You can see, you can see, you can see.
You want to sing? You're going to have to go.
Defendants Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten sang and laughed at murder. Susan Atkins cashed in on the celebrity by selling her life story. Her version of the murders was out in paperback before the trial began. One of the jurors attempted to sell the story of his days at the trial.
I thought if I could make a few honest dollars, why, I would do so.
In the center ring, the main attraction was the bizarre personality of Charlie himself.
Are you sane?
Sane?
Yeah.
That's relative. That's up to the judge.
A packed courtroom was riveted by his antics.
Manson began a dialogue with Judge Charles Older. He said, "You are going to use this courtroom to kill me." Suddenly, Manson jumped on the defense table and leaped toward the judge, a yellow lead pencil in his hand. A bailiff tackled him in midair. As he was led away, Manson screamed, "In the name of Christian justice, someone should cut your head off." It happened in full view of the jury, with the 3 female defendants chanting in the background.
Defense attorney Ronald Hughes explained the X cut into Manson's forehead.
He's cut himself out symbolically with this X across his forehead, which he inflicted with a razor blade. One of the defense attorneys at one time told me that Mr. Manson may very well be Jesus Christ reincarnate.
Now, you told me a while ago that you regard Charlie Manson as the Antichrist.
He's a false prophet and has come to deceive as many people as he can.
Chief Prosecutor, Assistant DA Vincent Bugliosi.
The fact that someone has a twisted, bizarre, irrational mind does not necessarily mean he is insane in a legal sense.
Manson's celebrity status got the attention of even the president.
It was at an unscheduled, hastily arranged news conference inside Denver's federal courthouse that President Nixon made his assertion that Charles Manson is guilty.
Here is a man who was guilty, directly or indirectly, of 8 murders without reason. Here is a man yet who, as far as the coverage was concerned, appeared to be rather a glamorous figure.
Nixon's comments created a small tempest when defense lawyers sought to use them as grounds for mistrial. Manson defense attorney Paul Fitzgerald.
I mean, you gentlemen have to realize that you can't deal with prejudice on such a massive level. If the President of the United States says somebody's guilty, what recourse do you have? You answer the question.
In court, Manson held up a front-page headline with the controversial quote for the jury to see. Defense attorney Day Shin, who brought the newspaper into the courtroom, denied giving it to Manson.
We had no idea where Manson got that front page.
So you did nothing deliberately to provoke that incident?
Definitely not.
The lawyer was sentenced to 3 nights in jail for having the paper with him in court. But despite all the sideshows, the business of the court proceeded. Assistant DA Bugliosi built his case around 3 key elements. First, in return for immunity, star witness Linda Kasabian said that she'd testify to the identities of those who took part in the murders at the Tate House on August 9th and the LaBianca House on August 10th. Kasabian was in the car on both nights. The defense vehemently opposed Kasabian's testimony due to her history with drugs.
She had imbibed LSD a total of 300 times, and it was our position at that time that anyone who had imbibed those quantities of LSD over an extensive period of time would likely have difficulty differentiating between fantasy and reality, would have difficulty differentiating between truth and falsity, and between right and wrong.
And because someone takes LSD does not mean that thereafter they are forevermore precluded from telling the truth about anything. This, of course, is preposterous.
But the judge allowed Kasabian to take the stand, to the delight of the prosecutor.
She was in the driveway at first, and she heard these horrible, horrendous screams coming from men and women, constant screams, pleading for their lives, coming from inside the residence. At that point, she ran up to the residence. She wanted the carnage to stop.
There was supporting testimony from Spawn Ranch visitor Juan Flynn.
You know, I came in, I got something to eat, and he's just put a knife to my throat, and he says, "You son of a bitch. Don't you know I'm the one who's doing all these killings, you know?"
The second key point for Bugliosi was to prove that Manson exercised a form of mind control over his family members. In a police statement, Susan Atkins said they were all programmed by Charlie. He could make them do anything he wanted, she said, even to kill in cold blood. Patricia Krenwinkel's father believed his daughter remained under Manson's spell.
Do you think she's still under the influence of Charles Manson?
I definitely do.
Her mother felt that she'd raised a regular, well-adjusted daughter.
She didn't have highs and lows. She was just a normal, lovely, loving child.
Finally, Bugliosi had to prove there was a motive for the murders. Manson's motive was summed up in Helter Skelter, the name of a song by the Beatles with the exact words smeared in blood at the LaBianca house.
He had an obsession with Helter Skelter. He constantly predicted that Helter Skelter was coming down, meaning that the black man was going to rise up against the white establishment and murder the entire white race, with the exception of him and his followers, who intended, of course, to escape from Helter Skelter by going to the desert.
The next step in Manson's plan was for the family to assume rule over the blacks. Paul Watkins testified that the once carefree Manson was now driven to start a race war.
All of a sudden there got to be talk of revolution and killing and stabbing people and pigs and oh man, and it just kept building and building, and he built it more and more.
Near the end of the trial, with the jury absent, Manson took the stand and gave a rambling, hour-long defense of himself.
For several hours, Manson's narrative kept the crowded courtroom in absolute silence as he mixed comments on the evidence with his personal philosophy. It reflected a life in jail for 23 of his 36 years. Manson said, "I've killed no one, and I've ordered no one to be killed." By late morning, Manson said, "You're as much responsible for the Vietnam War as I am for killing those people." His remarks at times were eloquent and impressive, but in mid-afternoon, when Judge Charles Older asked if he wanted to testify in front of the jury, he declined. So did the three other defendants. And without presenting any witnesses, the defense in the Charles Manson trial has skidded to a stunning conclusion.
The jury found Manson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy.
I think that we were forced to select a jury from a very hostile and antagonistic community of Los Angeles. We wouldn't have had those problems if we would have been able to select a jury someplace else.
Juries, 12 people chosen from this community. They based their verdict solely and exclusively on the evidence that came from that witness stand. They were not influenced in any fashion whatsoever from any pretrial publicity. This is just weeping on the part of the defense.
After the trial, jurors had no second thoughts about their decision.
I hope that it will be a lesson to them that you just can't go into a person's house, you know, and butcher them up. I didn't even use the word murder. I said butchered them up.
The motive behind the thing, I'm thoroughly convinced that it was the helter-skelter motive and Charles Manson's influence upon the girls that sent him out to do the murdering.
Manson and his family protested the verdicts by shaving their heads.
We cut our hair, we did it together. Everything we do together.
3 months later, the guilty were sentenced.
The defendants were sentenced to die in the gas chamber at San Quentin, California. The last execution there was in 1967.
The system has judged itself. Now the brothers are coming out, and they're going to judge you as they have been judged.
The Manson family's love songs now changed to ominous threats.
You all know there's a revolution coming, and it's coming fast. It's just right around the corner now. You better believe he's going to cut some heads off when he gets out of here. He's going to cut all your heads off when he gets out of here. Because that's what you got coming.
In a separate trial, Charles Tex Watson was also found guilty in the Tate LaBianca murders, and he was sentenced to death, blamed for inflicting 80% of the wounds on both nights. Watson later tried to excuse his behavior before a parole board.
I did not want to do what I was doing. I seemed like I was controlled by another power. Matter of fact, when I went into the house and committed the crime and began to commit the crime, I told the victims that I was the devil and that I was here to do the devil's work.
Manson and his cohorts escaped the gas chamber when the California Supreme Court declared the death penalty unconstitutional in 1972. In the aftermath of the trial, the Manson story would not go away. Manson family members who were out of jail seemed bent on carrying on his destructive legacy.
A young woman identified as a disciple in the cult of convicted mass murderer Charles Manson aimed a loaded pistol at President Ford at point-blank range today, but a Secret Service agent quickly grabbed the gun and no shot was fired.
Manson follower Lynette Squeaky Fromm was sentenced to life in prison for trying to kill the president.
My concern is not your presidents. My concern is Manson, air, water, and earth.
In 1976, family member Sandra Good was convicted of sending death threats to corporate and government leaders. 10 years later, she wore a charm bracelet to show her loyalties had not changed.
These are the colors of my family. This is green, Leslie Van Houten. Yellow is Pat Krenwinkel. Gold is another family woman. Red is Lynette. Violet is Susan. And blue is myself.
Beginning in 1978, Manson became eligible for parole. He treated the parole hearings as he treated his trial, like a show.
Manson is, frankly, probably the best advertisement that California has ever had for the death penalty.
Do you feel that a person that committed such a heinous crime should come up for parole in 7 years? I don't.
In 1982, Sharon Tate's mother, Doris, began collecting signatures in her beauty salon to keep the Manson family behind bars. She also appeared on talk shows for her cause, sometimes with explosive results.
These people were not criminals. They were extremely peaceable. They were extremely loving, caring people.
Are you a member of the group of the Charles Manson family?
Yes, I was associated with them.
I figured so. That's what I thought. All I got to say.
I know that they killed her, okay? I know that the girls held her down, and I know that Watson stabbed her to death, okay?
27
Peaceful or not, okay? They have to pay for their crimes.
Manson was still denying his guilt for the crimes during a 1987 book promotion that turned into a chilling message to America.
Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something. You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be just like walking to the drugstore. Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Charles Manson was the ultimate misfit, not very good even at crime. Experts say that he was a serial killer who depended on others to do his killing. But as we'll see, he was the exception. For most serial killers are solitary types who murder on their own with cunning and cruelty. That story in a moment. He has been called Jack the Ripper, a mistake of nature, a mad beast, a killing machine. He is the serial killer, a frightening presence in America.
The monsters among us do live on. The American scene has become apple pie and mom and serial murder.
The FBI coined the term serial killer to identify the kind of murderers who seem to explode out of the shadows of our worst fears. Usually they are male, in their 20s or 30s. They're responsible for at least 4 killings each, with cooling-off hiatuses in between. Henry Lee Lucas and John Wayne Gacy represent 2 kinds of serial killers the FBI has targeted. Lucas was a drifter who murdered at random across America. He was linked by police to at least 51 killings. Gacy, believed responsible for as many as 33 murders, did all his killings in one place, his home in a Chicago suburb, where he posed as a model citizen.
A convicted sex offender who often entertained as a clown at children's parties was charged today with slaying a young boy in a community near Chicago's O'Hare Airport, and police say he has confessed to more murders.
Gacy's personality was analyzed by Robert Ressler, former director of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit.
John Wayne Gacy is probably a classic, what I would call a classic organized criminal personality. He's a serial killer. He planned, he premeditated, he developed lures and ways of getting his victims in his custody.
While living in Waterloo, Iowa, Gacy, husband and father, had been convicted of sodomy with a 16-year-old boy. His wife divorced him while he was in prison. When he was released for good behavior after serving 18 months, he moved to Illinois, remarried, and was soon accepted by his new community, running a construction business out of his home. He volunteered in children's hospitals dressed as Pogo the Clown. He even earned a handshake from Rosalind Carter. Gacy passed for an ordinary, hard-working family man.
I think Gacy was caught in between two worlds. He was, on the surface, a heterosexual father and businessman, and had a community image to more or less keep up. Behind the scenes, Gacy was very strongly attracted to adolescent young males.
Gacy cruised Chicago streets, luring young men back to his house with job offers and marijuana. Then he'd take them to his killing den in the basement. Incredibly, Gacy's wife failed to notice what was going on. Quietly, young men began to disappear from Gacy's hometown of Norwood Park near Chicago. Arthur Peterson was fortunate to have escaped Gacy's basement.
He wanted me to realize how easy it would have been for him to kill me right then and there.
Peterson did not report the incident to police, dismissing Gacy's threats as fantasy. But the Peterson episode demonstrated that Gacy was becoming more careless, out of control.
His last victim shows how cavalier he was getting. He was working in a drugstore in Des Plaines, Illinois, doing a subcontracting estimate. The young boy, his last victim, Robert Peast, was a stock boy in that store. And Gacy nailed him right out of the back of the store.
When 15-year-old Robert Peast failed to return home that night, his parents, knowing that he'd had a job interview with Gacy, went to the police. The police put the house under surveillance and later obtained a search warrant, which resulted in a grim series of discoveries.
Actually, just two skeletonized remains of two human bodies, and that's all.
Searchers today found the remains of 4 more bodies at the home of a convicted sex offender in a Chicago suburb. That brings the total to 9 bodies.
You might be witnessing one of the most horrible crimes, perhaps, in a century.
Gacy buried most of his victims in the crawl space under his house. Eventually, the police removed the remains of 29 bodies from the house, but the Peast boy was not among them. Gacy told police he had dumped the boy's body into the Des Plaines River. In all, Gacy confessed to 33 murders over a 3-year period. For his trial in 1980, however, Gacy pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. 5 weeks later, the jury rejected his insanity plea and found him guilty as charged.
Insane or evil? The jury quickly decided that Gacy is not crazy, agreeing with prosecutors that for 7 years, Gacy lured 33 young men into his small home, torturing some, murdering all, then carefully burying them. John Wayne Gacy will be back in court later today, so will the jury, to start considering the penalty for his crimes. The defense wants him committed for the rest of his life. The prosecution wants the electric chair.
After a brief deliberation, the jury sentenced Gacy to death. Robert Peast's father was present for the verdict.
Revenge, that he killed my son and that we're going to kill him. And, you know, it's a life for a life is what it boils down to. And I'll go down there, I'll pull the switch if they have to.
12 years later, with his legal appeals and time running out, Gacy was still on death row, showing no remorse. He kept changing his story, kept denying that he was solely responsible for all 33 killings.
Robert Peast was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peast?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was... That body was put into the river.
It was taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods.
A serial killer, an individual like this, is inherently a manipulative personality, and they have been manipulating people from early childhood.
He's responsible. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it in advance. He carried it out, and he enjoyed it.
After 14 years on death row, serial killer John Wayne Gacy was finally executed today.
Gacy was given a lethal injection at the statewide correctional center at Joliet, Illinois in May of 1994. He denied his crimes right to the very end, a cocksure attitude typical of many serial killers, including one who murdered from coast to coast. Like Gacy, Henry Lee Lucas was a calculating predator with an oversized ego who believed he would never be caught. Unlike Gacy, Lucas was a drifter who got away with murder for over 30 years, beginning in 1951.
1951 was a little schoolgirl. She was about 16 years old.
And I had been out driving around, and I seen her on the road, and I stopped and picked her up and took her over the side of the road and raped her and killed her.
Henry Lee Lucas grew up in backwoods Virginia with an alcoholic father and a prostitute mother. As a teenager, Lucas served a string of jail terms for breaking and entering, for auto theft. Released from the Virginia State Penitentiary in 1953, he traveled to Michigan, where his mother had relocated. 4 months later, they fell into a drunken quarrel.
We were arguing and fighting, and Mom had hit me with a broom, and I swung around to hit her with, you know, side the head with my hand. You know, I had a knife in my hand where I cut her on the neck. So she died of a heart attack, and they charged me with her death.
Lucas was sentenced to 40 years in Michigan State Prison for his mother's murder. He was released in 1970 over his own protests and a warning that he would kill again. True to his word, Lucas embarked on a killing spree that took him through the Southwest and Florida.
There's been strangulations, there's been knifings, there's been shootings, there's been hit and runs, hangings, smothered to death, beaten to death. Every type of crime that you can put in your mind, I've done it.
The chameleon figure eluded police until 1982, when he was picked up on a weapons charge in Texas. In jail, Lucas stunned authorities by confessing to hundreds of murders coast to coast.
Working with the police, I've been able to establish 360.
We found that Lucas had attempted to confess to the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. He had attempted to claim that he had delivered the poison to Jim Jones in Jonestown when they, with all the people there that were poisoned.
The Dallas Times-Herald broke a story that ran down the list of murders Lucas had confessed to, along with documents showing where he was on the dates of the murders. It was becoming obvious that Lucas could not have committed all the murders he said he did.
Nonetheless, in June of 1984, after an official investigation, the state of Texas did successfully prosecute Lucas on 5 counts of murder.
The jury entered a verdict. We, the jury, found the defendant Henry Lee Lucas guilty of the offense of murder as alleged in the indictment.
Lucas was sentenced to death. His confessions were studied by police departments around the country, seeking possible ties to unsolved murders in their jurisdictions. Later in 1984, Lucas was escorted to California for a 10-day, 4,000-mile tour of the scenes of unsolved crimes.
The Attorney General said it defied belief, but was true. Lucas led lawmen to dozens of murder sites. Lucas's knowledge of the killings was so precise, 15 cases were closed. Among them, 1981, an unidentified teenager strangled.
Overnight, the media turned the condemned man into a celebrity.
The press was there popping flashbulbs at him. Hey, the nobody becomes somebody. That, again, is a very strong draw for the serial killer, is the individual who has been nothing his entire life now has his 15 minutes of fame, and they eat it up.
In 1985, away from the media attention, back on death row in Texas, Lucas suddenly reneged on his confessions.
Henry Lee Lucas now admits he's not just a killer, he's also a liar.
There's proof, but I haven't done the crimes.
Henry Lee Lucas now says he didn't kill the more than 350 people he said he did. Instead, he says, law enforcement officers across the country helped him confess to unsolved murders.
You're saying they'd tell you about a case and then you'd sort of repeat it back to them?
That's all. I would talk, I'd say maybe I shot her, you know. And they said, no, that's not right, you know. Well, I know it has to be something else. So I would say, well, maybe I strangled her. And that wouldn't be right. So they said, well, no, that ain't right, you know. I said, well, maybe I stabbed her. And they said, oh, yeah, that's right now. That's right.
You take a word of a police officer with years of experience, or do you take the word of a convicted murderer who is also a convicted liar?
I've killed one person, which I'm responsible for, and that was Mother.
Well, it's something that we have expected for a long time. Lucas is a mass murderer, a serial murderer, but his primary motivation now is to escape the death penalty.
Like John Wayne Gacy's 11th-hour attempt to save himself, Henry Lee Lucas's appeal of his convictions did not succeed either. As a result of investigations like that into the Henry Lee Lucas case, the FBI began to develop systems of crime scene analysis and criminal profiling to help local authorities cope with serial killers more effectively. And as we'll see, those methods were central in catching and convicting Wayne Williams in the Atlanta child murders case. The case of the Atlanta child murders brought national attention to the tools and techniques developed by the FBI to combat serial murders. FBI agents became involved in the case, from analysis at the crime scenes to strategies in the courtroom. The child murders case began on July 28, 1979, when a woman out for a walk discovered the bodies of two teenage boys.
14-year-old Edward Smith and 13-year-old Alfred Evans were the first known victims.
These are not pleasant days on the south side of Atlanta. Someone has been abducting and murdering black children, and the police, unable to make any headway, are under fire.
To ask why haven't we is a rhetorical question, because if we could have, we would have.
The bodies of 10 more children, ages 9 to 14, were found over the next 12 months. Most of them had been strangled, beaten, and drowned. All of them were African American.
Over the past 16 months in Atlanta, 14 black children have been murdered or have disappeared. There have been no major breakthroughs reported.
Dusk to dawn curfews were imposed as the anxiety in Atlanta's black communities began to border on panic.
Is your mother gonna pick you up? Yes. Where is she? My little girl was scared to even get on the bus.
By March of 1981, 20 bodies had been found. First, it was rumored that a white supremacist was killing the children. Then that a police officer was behind the murders. The pressure on authorities to make an arrest was enormous.
Going door to door to everybody in the city to find information.
But Atlanta police weren't even sure they had a serial killer on their hands. Finally, Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson asked the FBI to join the case.
We have asked for help of any kind and every kind that can be given by the federal government.
Robert Ressler and the FBI used a technique called criminal profiling to come up with a portrait of a likely suspect for the police. They studied the autopsy and crime scene reports on all the victims and compared this information with computerized data on the methods and styles of other serial killers. Historically, most serial killers have been Caucasians. But after completing their profile, Ressler and his FBI team told Atlanta police to look for an African-American serial killer.
We felt it was a black-on-black crime, and we felt that the individual was not being caught because, being black himself, he could blend into that scene where these young men were being snatched.
The FBI thought the suspect was someone whom the victims had trusted. They also instructed police to stake out every bridge in the city because the killer's modus operandi was to dump victims' bodies into rivers and lakes. It turned out the FBI assessment was right on target. On May 22nd, 1981, police apprehended Wayne Williams after hearing a loud splash and observing him drive away from the Chattahoochee River Bridge. The 23-year-old Williams, a college dropout who lived at home with his elderly parents, was a jack of all trades. He operated a neighborhood radio station. He was also a freelance video news photographer who covered police and fire emergencies for Atlanta TV stations. At the time of his arrest, he was a self-employed music promoter, scouting for young talent in black neighborhoods.
Armed with a warrant, FBI agents and members of the Atlanta Police Task Force spent much of the afternoon searching the house where 23-year-old Wayne Williams lives with his parents.
Williams denied dropping anything into the river. But searching his station wagon, police found nylon rope, a pair of gloves, some fibers and hairs, and bloodstains on the front seat. But because none of the evidence linked him directly with the crimes, and because at the time no victim had been found, he was released. 2 days later, the body of Nathaniel Cater, victim number 28, was pulled out of the Chattahoochee River. As the investigation proceeded, it was learned that Williams had visited some of the crime scenes as a volunteer on search teams, and even tried to get a job at a morgue where some of the victims' bodies were sent.
It really shows that morbid nature of the individual to get in, to more or less get closer to the circumstances of the crimes that he has committed, the havoc that he is committing and causing, and of course that again feeds the ego.
In Atlanta, police arrested and charged 23-year-old Wayne Williams with the most recent in a series of murders of black youths.
The warrant charged Williams on June 23rd with the murders of Nathaniel Cater and another man, Jimmy Ray Payne, whose remains were also recovered from the Chattahoochee.
Williams' attorney, Mary Welcome, said today her client would plead not guilty to the murder charge. A preliminary hearing is set for tomorrow.
I told them that I dropped nothing in the river. They said that. I didn't. It just looks like to me you may have just a bunch of murders out here. I did not do it.
During the 9-week trial, Williams stuck to his story in spite of mounting circumstantial evidence against him.
The jury in the Atlanta trial of Wayne Williams took a bus ride today for a personal look at a key point of evidence and a key point of argument between the prosecution and defense. It is a bridge over the Chattahoochee River.
It is on this two-lane bridge that the prosecution believes that Wayne Williams stopped his car about 3 a.m. on May 22nd, removed the body of Nathaniel Cater, and threw him into the Chattahoochee River. After watching them, Judge Clarence Cooper said it was obvious that the jury has been paying close attention to the testimony. But defense attorneys were hoping for more. They were hoping it would show how difficult it is to throw a body off of this bridge.
The prosecution grilled Williams on details of the murders for 3 days. It was an FBI strategy to break through the defendant's innocent facade. For 2 days, Williams held his own, but then he became cold and hostile. CBS News correspondent David Culhane quoted Williams from his final day of testimony.
Now, I've been through a lot, and I'm tired, and I'm trying to do the best I can to answer this question. The question is, did I kill anybody? And I done told this man I haven't.
When the prosecutor asked Williams if he was somehow programmed with a dual personality, Williams got very agitated.
Williams, no. You want the real Wayne Williams, you got him right here.
Williams' angry rebuttal was decisive in turning the jury against him, according to Emory University law professor Abraham Ordover.
They saw a man who was painting himself as a perfectionist, who was perfect and who was making it. But the man answering the questions was a man revealed to be flawed in terrible ways, and who could not come to grips with that.
Williams' performance on the witness stand was as damaging as the forensic evidence that was presented. Samples of microscopic fibers were found on the bodies of the two victims, which the FBI helped Georgia police match against fibers collected from carpeting and blankets in Williams' house and car. Witnesses for the prosecution also gave damaging testimony linking Williams to 10 of the other victims. The defense protested all the evidence was circumstantial, they said, but to no avail.
The verdict tonight, guilty. And to the end, Wayne Williams said he did not do it, did not kill any of 28 young Atlantans. But the jury found otherwise, that he did kill at least 2 of them, Jimmy Ray Payne and Nathaniel Cater, the 2 he was formally charged with killing. The sentence imposed immediately, 2 consecutive life terms. Parole, technically possible after serving 14 years.
The prosecution team was elated, confident that Williams was their man all along.
All of this time we were working on the case, we were trying to exclude Wayne Williams. We could not exclude Wayne Williams. We kept getting evidence that included Wayne Williams.
I think that it's probably the greatest fiber case ever tried, and it's probably going to advance scientific evidence in criminal trials in America more so than any case in this century.
I think the fiber evidence was the hardest evidence to overcome.
An appeal to overturn the verdict was rejected by the Georgia Supreme Court, but doubts continue to persist about just how many victims Williams was responsible for.
There are many unanswered questions in the Wayne Williams case even today. As I say, I believe that Wayne Williams killed many people, far more than he was convicted for. I don't think Williams killed all that people are saying he did.
But when Williams went to prison, authorities pointed out, the killing of Atlanta's children stopped.
They lived and died one by one over a 22-month period. They were individuals, each a young life, with a name, a personality, a family circle, a circle of friends, and a neighborhood they called home. LaTonya Wilson, age 8. Aaron Jackson, age 9. Jimmy Ray Payne, age 21. William Barrett, age 17. Nathaniel Cater, age 27.
Unfortunately, the story of serial killers has no ending. Even with the convictions of Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, Henry Lee Lucas, and Wayne Williams, many other serial killers remain at large. And despite improving technology and dedicated police work, crafty serial killers living still in the shadows of society are difficult to apprehend. Serial crime experts admit that what is so disturbing is that the very nature of our society, open, free, mobile, makes it almost inevitable that we will forever be reading about yet another serial killer on the loose in our midst. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century.
Now, a woman is accused of killing her husband and his young girlfriend on Law and Order, next on A&E.